These are four of the greatest gardens in Britain. Gravetime Manor, Ashwood, Great Dixter and Gresgarth Hall. Each has its own unique story to tell. It's like entering another world. Join me, Carol Klein, on a journey through the four seasons as I experience a year in their lives. I wish you could smell the perfume. Meet the people who look after them.
It's a bit like falling in love. You can't actually
Help it.
No.
Joyous, isn't it?
I think it's the best time of the year.
Unearth the secrets of how they evolve.
Chris has to be the bee.
Do you have to say bzzz while you're doing this? Reflect on their magnificent designs and celebrate the plants that make each so special. Carefully colour coordinated. These borders are at their absolute zenith. These are great British gardens. I can't wait. Can you? I'm going to spend a year travelling between four of Britain's most important and glorious gardens. From the rolling South Downs to the rural West Midlands and on to the north of Lancashire. I'll visit all four to discover what it is that makes them so special and to explore how each one changes during the different seasons. I'm starting my journey in the spring, the season of new beginnings, when all over Britain our gardens are waking up. I'm heading south to a groundbreaking place that changed our very idea of what spring means in a garden. This beautiful country house garden nestles amidst the tranquil East Sussex countryside. It's one of the most important of British gardens. Gravetime Manor was the home of the pioneer of the wild garden, where plants were allowed to romp away in a groundbreaking new style that drew its inspiration from nature. His name was William Robinson. He was an Irishman, a pioneering plantsman and prolific writer who changed the course of British gardening. Before him, country house gardens were constricted by Victorian formality, dominated by straight lines and bedding plants. William Robinson broke all the rules and set gardens free, and spring is the perfect time of year to appreciate his genius. Gravetime Manor epitomises what we now think of as a great spring garden. Dreamy drifts of crocus and daffodils spread like carpets throughout woodlands and magical meadows. But gardens weren't always this way. If you've ever come across a scene like this, it's almost certainly been in a great big garden or a country house hotel, and you sort of take it for granted and think it's always been like that. But it was Robinson who actually brought this kind of idea into existence. Robinson skillfully orchestrated his planting to look as natural as possible. So all the things he's planted here, you can actually see in the wild. This is our own little Lent lily, Narcissus pseudo-narcissus. But that looks huge in comparison to these dainty little things. This is Narcissus cyclaminius. The petals are reflex, they go right backwards, almost as though the flower had had a fright and it had gone, ooh, and pulled these petals back. It's such a glorious little thing. And growing beside it, look at this, what a cutie. Today, the bones of this glorious garden remain almost exactly as Robinson left them when he died in 1935. There are 3 main types of garden area represented here, each one brilliantly integrated with the others. There are carefully managed wild areas, including the front meadow above the lake, the orchard, and the woodland gardens. Tucked away behind the house, William Robinson built what has to be the most impressive walled kitchen garden in Britain. And thirdly, at the heart of the garden, close around the house, are the more formal areas of the little garden and Robinson's incredible flower garden. In the summer, this will be the star attraction. In the late 1950s, his former home was turned into a hotel. The garden and the hotel have a mutual relationship. Each relies on the other. It's all overseen by acclaimed head gardener Tom Coward and his faithful canine companion Vera. The spring is critical in preparing for the year ahead. Typical of a British spring, the weather's turned wet. Fortunately for me, Tom's got somewhere under cover to grow plants more suited to sunnier climes.
So this is our peach house, Carol.
Ooh, it's very beautiful, but this is the most beautiful thing in here.
I'm glad you like them.
Fantastic.
They're one of the hardest crops to grow, and one of the problems is they flower so early, and there's no insects about. So luckily, Chris is our resident peach expert, really. And Chris has to be the bee.
And what are you using?
So we're using rabbit tails on stick. We use them because they're really soft and delicate, and they're really good at transferring the pollen.
Well, can I have a go at this, Chris?
Absolutely.
Would you mind? And then I'm making my own peaches. Yeah?
Yeah.
And all you do is just touch these.
Yeah, just gently
try and
brush
pull
it.
some. And then you move them on to...
Yeah, just
two
work,
more.
Yeah, work your way down the branches.
And how often do you do this?
Every day. For a couple of weeks, or whilst it's in full flower, really.
Thank you very much. Come the summer, the peach house at Gravetime Manor will be replete with the fruits of our labour. But before that, I've got plenty more delicious spring treats to sample. It's spring, and I'm visiting 4 of Britain's greatest gardens. Extending alongside a stretch of the Staffordshire and Worcester Canal in the Midlands lies one of my very favourite gardens. This is John's garden at Ashwood. It's the life's work of one of Britain's greatest nurserymen, who's dedicated his life to growing award-winning plants. If you love plants, then this is the garden for you, in every season. The garden has been orchestrated by John Massey, a dear friend of mine, whose passion for plants is an inspiration for us all. Awards and 52 gold medals have punctuated John's gardening career. The route to success began when his father purchased Ashwood Nurseries in the 1960s. John's interest in botany blossomed. The nursery at Ashwood has grown and grown, but now, for John, it's the garden that totally enthralls him. And in the spring, I can see why. Spring is the best season to meet this master nurseryman for the first time, when you'll find him in his greenhouse, poring over the greatest of all his many plant passions. A real spring gem. Oh, John, this has to be the best collection in the world. It's wonderful. Heralding the arrival of spring are hepaticas, delicate, dainty, and truly delightful.
Often people say, why do you choose a particular plant? But I think they choose you.
They chose you, yeah.
I think it's a bit like falling in love. You can't actually...
help it.
No, and you can't explain why. It's just an attraction.
Hepaticas belong to the buttercup family. They thrive in woodlands. Across the world, there are many different species, and John's made it his mission to seek out all of them.
And where have you been to try and find them?
I've been through lots of Europe. I've been to Korea, China, Kyrgyzstan, and Japan, of course, which I feel is the epicentre of hepaticas.
Yeah.
Drainage, most important thing with hepaticas. You see, in the wild, they're growing on a steep slope, usually about 45 degrees. So that naturally gets rid of all the water.
Yeah, it just runs away anyway. Because that's the secret of trying to grow anything, isn't it? Just to try and give it the sort of conditions that it finds in the wild.
Well, I think, it's so exciting, you know, to be out there, but you learn so much from just seeing plants in the wild. I'm a pretty boring sort of person that I wouldn't dream of going anywhere where hepaticas didn't grow.
Outside, John's manicured canal-side garden beckons, carefully designed to show off his plants brilliantly every day of the year.
Listen to the birds singing.
Gleaming from mossy banks, white trilliums hold their heads high, and in pots on the terrace, hepaticas steal the show.
What do you call this?
We call this the ruin garden, and it's one of the few areas we replant every twice a year. Everything's in pots.
And the beginnings of spring.
And the wonderful, with the hepaticas all full out there.
So it's a true window display.
Yeah, it is. Pure theatre, but a lot of fun.
This playfulness was the hallmark of another of our greatest gardening pioneers. A flamboyant writer who wrote that spring was a most encouraging time. His Sussex garden certainly encourages me at this time of year. It's called Great Dixter, and it was the lifelong home of Christopher Lloyd, a revolutionary gardener who tore up the gardening rule book and wrote many better books of his own.
This magnificent house and its 6 acres of garden have become a horticultural mecca for garden lovers all over the world. It was more than 100 years ago that the Lloyd family bought the property. Later, it was passed on to one of the children, Christopher Lloyd, known as Christo. He became one of the most influential gardeners of the 20th century.
Christopher Lloyd was a celebrated gardening writer. His numerous articles and books, based on his experience at Great Dixter, have made it one of the most written about gardens and one of the most loved. The garden is now looked after by a team led by head gardener Fergus Garrett. He grew to know Christo very well.
He loved life, he loved people, he loved exciting people. I loved him to bits. He was part of my family. We had a really good relationship, and he was like a father figure, a grandfather figure. He was a
good friend.
A brilliant friend, you know, and he was so vibrant.
And even when he was all poshed up.
Oh, he always used to wear a dress shirt.
Gorgeous coloured shirt.
And he used to say, "Oh, Amanda, you know, I've got a blue shirt, I've got a purple one, I've got a two-tone one that sparkles. I've got a yellow one, but I haven't got a yellow one with black stripes, rather like a bee." And now, even now, when I go and I see a yellow shirt with black buttons, I think Christo would have loved that. But I did a lecture once where I showed his shirts, and they were all pinks and oranges and yellows all mixed. And then I showed the blonde border, and I thought, actually, it's the same colours. He gardened in the colours that he loved, and he wore the colours that he loved.
Christo used daring colours, like the artist he was, constantly experimenting, as he did in so many ways. The spirit of adventure lives on here, and where he led, many of us have followed. This enchanting garden covers 6 acres. The old house was extended by the famous architect Edwin Lutyens, who also laid out the garden, which wraps around the house on all sides. There are 19 different areas. Some, such as the front and orchard meadows, are very natural wildflower areas, but these are interspersed with more traditional, formal ones, such as the High Garden, the Peacock Garden and the Topiary Lawn. To the right of the entrance is the Barn Garden with its octagonal pool, which leads through to the secluded wall garden. But I want to begin my year-long journey in the orchard meadow at the back of the house. Nothing epitomises spring as much as the wildflowers that grow here. So this is Fritillaria meleagris, commonly called the snake's head fritilla, and you can see why, because if you look at the buds everywhere, they're just like these little serpentine heads, and then they open into this beautiful bell, and a lot of them are checkered, and it almost looks hand-painted. Right in front of it is this purple orchid, these beautiful spotted leaves. Dactylorhiza, one of our native orchids, that will make these big purple spikes. And then there's cow parsley, and there are buttercups, there's sorrel. The more plants you have, the more insects you get, the more birds come, the more small mammals, and the whole thing just works together beautifully. And what's more, it doesn't just work for this moment in spring, although it's probably at its most beautiful right now. There's this huge succession that continues right the way through the year. At no time would you come into this meadow and not find something of interest. I think this garden, it has such energy and such dynamism, and immediately you're just taken over by the magic of the place. You're cast under its spell. There'll be so much more magic to explore here next season. But before the spring is over, I've been invited to visit one final garden. A very special place I've never had the chance to see before. This is Gresgarth Hall near Lancaster in rural Lancashire, and its garden is one of Britain's best-kept secrets. It nestles at the bottom of a windswept, steep-sided valley, carved out by a crashing beck. It's acclaimed for achieving the holy grail of great garden design. Total harmony with its challenging natural landscape, thanks to its legendary owner, one of Britain's greatest garden designers. Gresgarth is the private home of Lady Arabella Lennox Boyd. Lady Arabella was born and brought up in Italy, and she's been designing gardens for more than 45 years, winning 6 gold medals at the RHS Chelsea Flower Show.
I came here and I didn't like it at all. I mean, I thought, how am I ever going to make a garden here? I knew that I needed views. I also knew that the landscape was so strong that I couldn't fight against it. I had to go with it, and that my garden had to merge into the landscape as naturally as possible.
It's the beginning of April at Gresgarth Hall. Despite spring coming late to North Lancashire, this sleeping beauty is waking up, and the garden is beginning to sparkle with early gems. There could not be a better place, a more fitting place to talk about spring at Gresgarth than this. This is the Spring Walk, and it abounds with wondrous plants that are all
just beginning to shoot through the ground. This is Helleborus viridis, meaning green. It's tiny and dainty and very subtle. And this is their time. They're relishing this weather. Bring it on, they say, you know, we're all right. And pulmonarias, great vast swathes of them. Totally tough, extremely hardy. And I think that's the thing. This is a northern garden. It's cold. If you're going to live here and flourish, then you've got to be tough.
Arabella is giving me a tour of the grounds, starting with a wonderful lake that sweeps away from the stone terraces.
That lake is just lovely. Was it always like this, though?
No, it wasn't. It was like a sort of banana shape. I wanted it to feel as though the water was flooding this little valley. And also I wanted it to look really natural, and that's why it's very curvy.
You're not at all aware of where it comes from. It could just continue off into the landscape.
The Lennox Boyds bought Gresgarth Hall in 1979, when it was full of a jumble of self-seeded trees. Over a 40-year period, Arabella has carved out a magical Gothic pleasure garden. I'm intrigued to find out more about how this intrepid gardener, brought up in the warm climate of Italy, set about designing her own garden in this cold northern spot.
It must have seemed so elemental.
I'm quite elemental myself, and I thought, well, I need to have formality around the house. I need to have some of my Italian straight lines, and so I designed the terraces, which lead down to the level of the river.
Even in the Lancashire drizzle, this garden is a mouth-watering prospect. But when I come back, it'll be the height of summer. It's then that I'll get the chance to see Gresgarth's strong structure, painted with a riot of floral loveliness.
It's just gorgeous.
Summer has arrived, bringing unusually warm and dry weather to Britain's gardens. And that includes Gresgarth Hall, our most northerly garden. It's the perfect time for any garden visit. But here, celebrated designer Arabella Lennox Boyd is renowned for her summer planting.
It's almost unbelievable, the transformation that's occurred since we were last here. We had that cold, wet spring, and then suddenly the whole summer got concertinaed into a few weeks. And now everything has burgeoned. Everywhere is smothered, covered in blossom. It's just gorgeous.
At Gresgarth Hall, Arabella has designed a landscape of complete contrasts, formal on one side and relaxed on the other. To the west of the hall, long herbaceous borders and lawns provide strong architectural elements. On the other side, everything changes. Carving its way through the landscape is a river called the Arkle Beck. Crossing this turbulent torrent rewards us further, leading us on into a wild and wonderful wood.
Of all the flowers in a gardener's vocabulary, it has to be the rose that epitomises summer best. And here at Gresgarth, roses are in complete control. I wish you could smell the perfume. It just wafts everywhere. And they're growing up the walls, over pergolas. They're absolutely everywhere, and they're at their very peak. It makes you feel as though you've fallen, very softly, into the middle of a magical fairy tale.
This level of manicured precision is incredibly labour-intensive. And it's thanks to the skill of head gardener David Sayer and the hard work of his team of gardeners that happy, healthy roses abound.
You look lovely in your arbour.
Oh, yeah.
He's an elusive man, but I've caught up with him in Arabella's arbour, which is festooned with Rosa rambling recta on the edge of the beck. This is not casual gardening. All Arabella's planting, even in the very wildest areas, is meticulously managed, mapped out and databased in full detail. This is a controlled riot.
So are you plotting and planning?
Yeah, this is our master plan. We spend a lot of time and effort recording all our shrubby plants and trees, so we know when it came in, who from, when we planted it.
So where, when and how, that's what this basically tells you?
Absolutely.
I'm crossing over to the other side of the beck to explore part of the garden I've yet to step foot in, the wild wood. This is Arabella's Arboretum, where she indulges her great passion for trees.
Isn't that just pure poetry?
These dainty ornamental trees belong to a family called Cornus, and they're a good choice for a smaller garden because they have lovely year-round interest.
In this variety, what looks like the flowers are deep pink, but they're not flowers at all, they're bracts, petal-like forms, and the flower itself is here, lots and little tiny flowers, a cluster. So the whole idea of these big bracts that are so bright and vivid is to bring in pollinating insects. It's like waving flags and saying, this way. And in they come into the flower in the centre here.
Back in the formal part of the garden, the beds and borders at Gresgarth have burst into summer profusion.
How lovely to see you.
This is Gresgarth's iconic blue garden, and it's at its absolute peak in the summer. This is its time to shine, and one colour stands out brighter than all the rest.
Why did you choose blue? Why a blue border?
I think it's because there are a lot of plants that I love which are blue.
There's this lovely sort of concentration of purple and blue here.
It is good, isn't it?
Do you know what I love about that aconite? I like those liney green buds. They're almost lemon, aren't they?
They are, and the blue is as if it had been painted on those individual flowers.
I love the solidity of those delphiniums too, and then grasses just coming out over there too. It's lovely.
Oh, thank you.
On the deepest level, all gardens can be seen as symbolic, a representation of paradise, where nature is harnessed. But here at Gresgarth, in all its heady sensuality, you feel that nature's force lies just under the surface.
There's strength and structure here, and yet you're constantly aware of Arabella's acknowledgement that it's nature who's truly in control.
Nothing is more dynamic than John Massey's plant pack garden at Ashwood, as we step into the rich profusion of summer. The spring garden has made way for all of this. John's garden spans 3 acres and unfurls like a ribbon at the back of his house. From the ruined garden beside the kitchen, island beds lead you along the canal. On the other side of the capacious lawn are long herbaceous borders, and tucked away behind those are John's private greenhouses. The centrepiece of the garden is John's impressive pond and rockery, with ornamental features, trees and splendid shrubs. After the intense heat of May and June, the garden is alive with activity. Nowhere more intensely than in John's pollen-laden summer borders. One of the brightest stars in the border is this Helenium. It's abuzz with bees. This one is Sahin's early flower. And it's not just early, but it's covered in flowers. And the flowers are covered in bees. And the honeybees, you can hear the whole plant humming. And if you look carefully, each of these bees goes to a particular flower and it works its way around the edge of it, feasting, sucking up this nectar, and in the process becoming covered in pollen. When this kaleidoscope of colour combines with verdant greens, the effect in John's garden is glorious. Marvellous to see. Wonderful, wonderful. And in such a splendid summer. Oh. How's it been?
It's just been water, water, water. I feel as though I'm missing something if I'm not surgically attached to a hose.
But the garden looks incredibly green, consider it.
Every time we water a pot, we give it a weak solution of liquid feed to keep it going.
Whether it's flamboyant dahlias or amazing astrantias, John's garden is full to bursting with summer stars to revel in. John's absolutely daft about hydrangeas. He can't grow enough of them. And they do hugely well here. Of course, they get exactly the right kind of care that they need to.
They're bomb-proof. Everyone can grow them. This is vanille fraise, and you get the lovely red stems, right. And the flowers age to pink very quickly.
I love them when they turn to pink. I think one of the things I admire most about this border too is just, you know, the lovely associations you've got in here, because they lend themselves to that, don't they, being mixed with other perennials?
Yeah, they sort of light up a garden, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Despite this searing summer heat, John and his team have managed to keep this garden in splendid condition. You really feel it's at its zenith. Which makes this such a wonderful time of year for a garden visit. Summer is the most popular time for visitors at Great Dixter, Christopher Lloyd's garden of experiment and change. Fresh developments are an ongoing process here. Christo may have gone, but his spirit remains. And each summer, there's one feature that can be relied upon to exemplify this. This is the world-renowned Great Dixter Long Border. It's more than 300 feet long and 15 feet wide. It's one of the deepest borders I've ever come across. When the long border was originally laid out, the taste of the day dictated that it should feature only traditional herbaceous flowering plants. No shrubs, no bulbs, and certainly no trees. And all arranged in a very regimented fashion. But Christo had other ideas. This is no herbaceous border. This is a true mixed border. Take this phlox, for example. Here they're using great big swathes, so they lilt through the border instead of being in clumps
every so often and very symmetrically arranged. But then there are plants like this agastache, which insects love and adore. Christo is a great entomologist, and Fergus and his crew have carried that interest on. The garden is so wildlife friendly, and this is a perfect example. Everywhere you look, there are plants that you wouldn't expect to see here. Great big grasses, fluffy artemisias, towering over everything else. I think what Christo passed on was a message not to do as I do, but to do as you do, to experiment, to enjoy, to appreciate plants, and to use them in marvellous, wonderful, imaginative ways. It's so wonderful to be back here in the summer. In the barn garden, everything has erupted with wild abandon. Where once there was the foliage of thalictrums and lady's smock was flowering, now there are mallows, salvias and heleniums. In fact, there are so many plants packed into this area. The old Brunswick fig, which provides a wonderful skeletal backdrop in the spring, is now struggling for the spotlight. Summer at Great Dixter is splendiferous. It's a place that's bursting with creative energy, and it's at this time of year when all those new planting ideas reach fruition. And it's an ongoing process. Everyone can see that it's going to continue in the same direction way into the future. My visit here is drawing to a close, but with the sunshine and long daylight hours continuing, I've got one remaining summer visit to make. It's summer at Gravetime Manor, William Robinson's wild and wonderful masterpiece in Sussex, where he rediscovered the free-flowing lines of nature and encouraged informal profusion back into the garden. At last, I'm able to rejoice in its creator William Robinson's masterpiece, the ornamental flower garden. It was well worth the wait. What a transformation since the spring. These natural-looking swathes of hardy perennials characterise the more naturalistic style of planting that Robinson ushered in more than 100 years ago. This has always been the garden's showpiece. But even though it appears more formal, it still reflects the daringly relaxed style he's known for. This is where he experimented. What he wanted to do was see what plants did. He wanted to give them the kind of place where they'd really thrive and really grow together. He championed combining different types of plants to provide a display of interesting flower and good structure right through to the first frosts. Robinson looked for plants whose natural habitat suggested they'd flourish in an English garden, no matter where they came from. We've got plants from all over the world. So just in this little space, we've got Spanish oats, this big Stipa gigantea. We've got cosmos from Mexico. We've got fennel from the Mediterranean and gladioli from South Africa. But they're all amalgamated in this way in which nothing looks unhappy next to its neighbour. They really do live together brilliantly well. A true international community. Here at Gravetime Manor, wild meadow areas were central to the original plan for the garden. Back in March,
They were awash with gorgeous spring flowers, but they've since been replaced with a different kind of beauty. The meadows might look natural, but to get them to flourish actually requires skilled intervention. Right now, you're doing things to the meadow.
Yeah, so we've just started to cut the hay. We leave it very late so that all of the wildflowers have set seed, and it's a lovely time of year where we can just start mowing the hay.
Cutting the hay helps maintain the mix of flowers and grasses in these hugely important areas of biodiversity. This year, head gardener Tom Coward plans to use the cut hay to help seed a new wildflower meadow, and he's invited me to help him.
So what we want to do is to cut the hay from this species-rich area and move the wildflower seed with the hay across to the new meadow, which used to be a mowed lawn. It's a bit like bundling up spaghetti on a fork, in a way.
Yeah?
That's it. And then spike it.
And then spike it, and then twirl it. And then lift it. Ooh. Oh no.
Make hay when the sun shines.
Ready, steady. Then we take the seed-packed hay to its new home and spread it out so the seed will drop onto the new area. And will you just leave it?
We'll leave it there for a week and we'll turn it and flick it around.
Yeah.
And then after a week or so, then we'll gather it up and hopefully by the spring, those wildflower seeds should germinate.
The results of this work won't be visible until next spring. But that's a great thing about a garden like Gravetye. There's always something to look forward to in the future. So far, I've witnessed the promise of early spring unfold to offer the heady delights of summer. So where better to see the transition to the next season than here at Gravetye Manor, where you just know the changing colours are going to astound. Autumn. For many, it's a favourite season, with its misty light and rich fruitfulness. Autumn has well and truly arrived at Gravetye. You can see it, you can smell it, you can sense it. It permeates every inch of the place. And the plants that trumpet the arrival of the season are these magnificent trees. Some of them have been here for hundreds of years, and they form a backdrop for everything that's happening in the garden below. There are so many beauties here, from radiant acers to this wonderful euonymus, commonly known as the winged spindle, with its crimson leaves and delicate fruit. You can really appreciate William Robinson's skilled understanding of plants. Not to be outshone by the trees, the flower garden is putting on its own spectacular autumn show. As soon as I walked in this morning, the first thing that struck me was the atmosphere here. Just how beautiful and soft and mellow everything is. When I was here in the summer, the flower garden was at its zenith. But thanks to Tom's skillful pre-planning, it's still just as beautiful. I love the way you've repeated these blobs of colour right the way down. And that dahlia is just...
It's cracker, isn't it? Magenta Star, that one. Yeah, it's really good. One of my favourite dahlias of all time, actually. I kind of enjoy it with the orange. They're quite strong colours, but this time of year they're softened by the light. In midsummer, when the light's stronger, those colours can be a bit washed out, but at this time of year, I really like it.
I mean, it was so ebullient in the summer, wasn't it? And now everything just feels, you know, it just feels so right and so soft, so mellow.
Yeah.
Autumn is the season of harvest, and not just for us humans. For wildlife, this is the time to stock up before the harsh winter months. And at John's garden at Ashwood, there are rich pickings due to this year's exceptional sunny and warm autumn. John has carefully planned his garden, so there's something to enjoy in every season. Now, during the autumn, the front garden provides a feast for the eyes and for the wildlife. And on the menu, crab apples and mountain ash.
I do love this time of year when sort of all the plants are saying, hey, you know, you haven't seen me all year, but look at me now.
Look what we've done.
Yeah, that's it.
Amongst the elegant, slender trunks of white birches, John's planted a mouth-watering selection of trees, ripe to be enjoyed, whatever the size your plot might be.
I think sorbus are terrific plants for small gardens, don't you?
They're great. You can get some very narrow ones, like I love that autumn spire.
Yeah. With the bright orange berries. That's out of this world.
And the foliage, and it just grows.
I mean, our native one, the berries are sort of orangey red, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I always find that the birds will take those berries first.
Yeah, there's definitely, can I say the word, a pecking order?
Oh.
But when we had a flock of 150 waxwings here, and you could get almost as close as we are.
Yeah.
And they filled the garden with this happy chattering.
Yeah.
And they started off on crabs first, then the sorbus, and then the odd cotoneaster and things like that. But I'm sure you're right.
But even between one genus,
yes,
they'll go for the red and orange, and then they'll move on to the pinky ones maybe, and then finish off with the white ones for dessert.
Yeah.
and that means that visiting birds like those waxwings, I mean, that's unusual, but fieldfares and redwings love them, don't they, all winter long?
Well, they'll often get really territorial over a tree.
Yeah.
You know, and anything else that's coming nearby is pout.
Creating a garden that benefits both wildlife and we humans is hugely important. We can admire their lovely appearance while the birds feast on the delicious fruit. Signs of the changing season can be admired throughout this immaculate garden. Grasses and autumn flowering perennials have come into their own, whilst these liquid amber trees offer us the true essence of autumn.
It does have the best colour leaves and the most varied, aren't they? The most diverse.
Well, what I love as well is when they fall onto the grass, they still look equally as beautiful.
But I bet you don't let anybody clear these up.
No, I definitely don't. I just love them falling on the hedge or on the pots even.
They decorate everything, don't they?
They do, yeah.
And I think the child in all of us just can't resist crunching our way through them.
I think they're the only leaves that look really good.
At Ashwood, I felt the crunch of autumn leaves beneath my feet. Here at Gresgarth Hall, consummate designer Arabella Lennox-Boyd has also given plenty of thought to seasonal colour, positioning the many magnificent trees she's planted to help blend the garden into its natural surroundings.
The trees and shrubs are at their absolute best. And it's at this time of year that you really become aware of Arabella's flair and her huge passion for placing trees and shrubs to make them look as though they'd always been there. Tucked in behind this meticulously manicured yew hedge is a perfectly placed little cercis. So cercis is the Judas tree. Earlier in the year, it's rich ruby red, but right now it's transformed into its autumn persona. Bronze, orange, russet, the whole thing is just an autumn delight. The great herbaceous borders have also transformed themselves into an autumnal picture. Way back in the summer, these borders, blue borders, were full of flowers, lots and lots of phlox, a real summery affair. But now it's just as colourful, just as exciting. There are grasses all the way through, tall miscanthus with great soft heads. But the most predominant feature of this border is these huge clouds of asters. Michaelmas daisies, most of us would know them as, because it's at Michaelmas, during the autumn, that these begin to flower. It's shorter day length, which actually prompts their flowering. And what an array of them there are, and these bold, big spikes of Nymphophia glowing in those autumnal colours. The whole thing is just a glorious celebration of the season. On one boundary, Arabella has created a stunning pleach lime walk, which is a particular treat at this time of year. Isn't it splendid? Look at the colour.
I know, it's really looking good, and I can't keep away.
Pleaching is a way of training trees to produce a narrow screen or hedge. It is a complicated process of tying in and interlacing flexible young shoots along a supporting framework to make walks and tunnels. It's got this big structure, and yes, it's got this daintiness with those little twigs, hasn't it?
I know, isn't it obliging? I mean, if you think of what you do to it every year.
At the end of a pleached walk, Arabella's cunning layout rewards us with a brilliant picture. She's planted this liriodendron, otherwise known as the tulip tree, its leaves aflame, to draw us down the walk like an autumn bonfire.
Look at that. It's joyous, isn't it?
It's wonderful. I think it's the best time of the year. No, not quite, but it's one of the best.
Especially when you're in the middle of it.
Especially when it's good, like this. I mean, I've never seen this amazing colour on these liriodendrons. I'm glad I planted them.
Yeah, so am I.
And if there's one thing you can count on Arabella doing, that'll be planting trees. Across the bridge in the 15-acre wood, Arabella has created a natural but carefully curated arboretum.
How many trees have you planted?
About 6,000, certainly.
And increasing all the time?
And increasing all the time, yes, I can't stop.
But the real skill has been making this woodland appear as if it's been here for 100 years.
It looks so totally in tune with nature.
You need the shade, but you also need the height, and you need the history. Yeah. And you need the wood to feel natural, even though it's completely unnatural, really, because I've planted this big collection of trees, which is my passion.
Although Arabella has room for many trees, she only chooses specimens that give good value all year round, including blossom, fruit, berries or seeds, and attractively coloured bark or autumn leaves. And we can all learn from that practice. And an autumn practice we can learn from at Great Dixter, that hothouse garden of experiment, is not just to look up at the treetops, tempting though that may be. October is about more than trees, and in Christo's garden, we can find seasonal beauty from the ground up.
In the autumn, occasionally it pays to look downwards. It certainly does here. And you're treated to this glorious display of autumn crocus just poking through the grass and opening these beautiful pale lavender chalices to the sunshine. And if you bend over, there is the most beautiful scent. Dead easy to plant, anybody can do it. But you must make sure that once those flowers are finished, the leaves come up and you don't touch them with your mower. Don't go anywhere near them because they need all that goodness from the leaves to go back into the ground and to give you a further show next year.
But it isn't all about show, especially at this time of year. Head gardener Fergus shares Christo's devotion to supporting wildlife, revolutionary in his time, which is responsible for Great Dixter's signature rustic style.
It's not at all a question of untidiness, it's all very deliberate.
It is, it's very deliberate. This was Christo's style, and he wanted the garden to be much more relaxed and have this sort of private feel about it. And so we allow things to come up in the cracks in the paving, we allow plants to spill out onto the paving, we allow plants to invade your space as well. And so it gives the garden a charm, a certain amount of romance, intimacy. Half the people who visit won't like that loose style, the other half will. So we're not... there to please everybody, but we're there to be an individual.
Christo would certainly have been as pleased as Fergus about the unexpected bonuses lurking in the compost heaps.
I asked the British Arachnological Society to come and survey the insects that we've got. They came out here to look at the long grass, but then they found it quite interesting to look at the compost heaps. And they had these little pewters, and they went and started sucking out spiders to identify them. And they found dozens and dozens and dozens of species in here. And they were really so excited that they went to other parts of the garden. They found a little thing that lived under a paving slab that hadn't been recorded since 1903 or something crazy like that. You suddenly realise that you're sharing this garden with all these incredible insects and all sorts of things. Dixter is extraordinarily rich, extraordinarily rich, which shows that an intensive garden, a colourful garden like this, that's gardened intensively, can be a safe haven for all this wildlife.
Christo's ideas were often ahead of his times. Today, his belief in the vital role a garden can play in sustaining wildlife is something we are all coming to share. Christopher Lloyd's thinking differed too from the received ideas of the day in his positive attitude to winter. The seasonal cycle nears its end at his garden at Great Dixter. Winter may have arrived with its short days and low light, but the garden is as breathtaking in winter as it is in every other season.
Winter's one of the busiest times of the year here at Great Dixter. For a start, there won't be any visitors in the garden until the end of March. And that means there are loads of opportunities for Fergus and his team to get on with all those important tasks that prepare the garden for the year ahead.
There's potting up to be done, and the herbaceous borders to be prepared.
And at this time of the year, one of the most important tasks is pruning, and there's plenty of that to do.
In winter, the evergreen hedges, the bones of the garden, really come into their own.
Winter's the very best time to appreciate the permanent features, the structure of the garden, like these astonishing peacocks. These peacocks were planted in about 1912, and Daisy, Christo's mother, used to refer to them as her parliament of birds. They've become iconic. If you know about Dixter, you almost certainly know about the peacocks.
As Christo said, if a garden looks good in winter, it's probably going to look good any day of the year. This is certainly true of Arabella's magical garden at Gresgarth Hall, where her skillful design makes as big a statement visually now as it does at any other time of the year.
I love the winter because I love to see structures. And now you see these lovely box balls and architecture, whilst in the summer there is so much going on, particularly in this garden, I think, because I can't stop buying plants. So, I'm filling the borders with everything I like.
So winter is simplicity and freshness and just being able to see everything.
Yes, and having views and everything being open. No colour, I just want green.
But the garden isn't just a feast for the eyes. Arabella knows only too well that a garden should delight all the senses.
There's one aspect of winter gardens that's very often neglected, and it shouldn't be. It's scent. This lovely little shrub, Sarcococca, has tiny, tiny little flowers. But the aroma from those flowers is just beautiful. And the scent pervades the air. Wherever you walk, you can smell it.
Whether you're drinking in the scent in the formal garden near the house or strolling through the wild woods, the perfume of scented shrubs pervades the air.
Suddenly, you're stopped in your tracks by this burst of colour. These beautiful cones of sparkling flowers. They're witch hazels, hamamelis. There's this sharp, spicy fragrance, and it carries on the air right through the wood. The essence of winter, but the promise of spring.
At Ashwood, winter uncovers John's passion for the perfect plant in a different way, when the dying back of his herbaceous planting reveals his skill with conifers.
I mean, when you look across that, how many different shades of green can you see?
Yeah, and green's so easy to work with, isn't it? Well, I'm no flower arranger, but green and white, you can't go wrong, which, like with the snowdrops and...
Well, it's nature's colour, isn't it? That's the thing.
I've always loved conifers, and to me they're an essential part of a winter garden. I don't think you can have a winter garden without them.
No. But here they just look so apt, don't they, in this sort of setting? John knows the right plant for the right place in every season. And now in winter, hellebores are the species he celebrates most.
They're fabulous in the garden. They have a hard frost, they collapse down to the ground, and then as soon as the sun comes, they lift up again. It's just like sunshine everywhere,
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
And,
a bit like having you around. Come on. Winter at Gravetime Manor. Through murky mists, the quintessential winter flower twinkles, bringing us almost full circle. Head gardener Tom can't get enough of them. What a lovely lot of snowdrops.
Aren't they incredible?
So where did they come from, Tom?
Yeah, well, we had a whole carpet of these wonderful snowdrops come up down near the lake.
Yeah.
No one can really appreciate them down there, and a really good way to propagate and divide them is to lift them now whilst they're in growth.
And where are they going to go?
Yeah, we want to plant them all along this sunken path on both sides so that it becomes a real carpet of white.
So we're just going to separate them up. It's lovely how they sort of bulk up spontaneously, don't they?
Don't they?
And you have one little handful and it turns into a dozen bulbs.
And such a delicate little thing. It's actually so vigorous.
Here we go. And I suppose you want to make them quite random, don't you?
Yeah, hoping they'll thrive here.
Look at that. You can see here's a new little bulb already starting to form on there.
Yeah.
It's lovely, isn't it? And forever and ever, these will be flowering.
I hope so. These are probably only going to be at their very best long after we're gone. But
Yeah.
It's quite a nice feeling.
I don't think Tom will ever be forgotten at Gravetime Manor. And these snowdrops will be part of his lasting legacy. In just the same way, these 4 inspirational gardens will go on. And so will my memories of them. I've seen the natural beauty of spring flowers transform to the abundance of summer. I've watched the glorious colour of autumn fade to the stately remains of winter. And above all, I've witnessed the devotion of some of Britain's most passionate gardeners.
It's really exciting, the whole thing.
Yeah, isn't it?
It's just the most wonderful, rewarding place to garden.
But you love it in here, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I love it.
I do too.
Yes.
It's the reason.
For being alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is what makes all of them great British gardens.